morning. I just want to express my gratitude to everybody here who has helped make this service a lovely and joyful moment of fellowship, and much gratitude to the social justice team who invited me into this space today. It's been a few years, so I'm grateful to be back. This time last year, if you were scrolling through my phone, there is one fact about me that you would find abundantly clear. I love cats. I am the quintessential pet parent, and I had literally thousands of cat pictures on my phones, from my home screen background of my first cat, Miko, to same-day video of two of my current cats, Keanu and Kittum, in one of their cuddle piles about to turn into a violet spat. I had photos of cats I met on the street, cats I watched for a weekend, cat memes I saved. I literally bought a phone with larger storage just so I could keep all of my pictures of cats. Then, almost 10 months ago, that all changed, and baby Noor arrived. Now I am that stereotypical new human parent that is documenting every little thing. Every time they pull themselves up in their playpen. Every time they cover their face with more food than they actually fill it with. Every time they have a conversation with whatever entity is in the room that I can't see. Every time I see them on the monitor sleeping with their little butt up in the air. If you've had a baby, you know what I'm talking about. And yes, every time they reach out to try and pet a cat. Becoming parents was no small decision or task for myself or my spouse. We live at the intersections of very real privileges and challenges. On the one hand, we are a queer couple, so the ways we could make our family necessitated medical and legal proceedings that disproportionately impact families like ours. But we were also privileged enough to have access to insurance and providers in a state that made it affordable and safe to grow our family when the time was right. It was not lost on us that we were at the height of our efforts to have a baby when the Dobbs decision came down in 2022, dealing a horrific blow to the reproductive justice movement that has made many families like ours possible. Yet, with all of the medical, legal, financial, and logistical aspects of our grow our family decision-making process, one factor weighed most heavily on my heart. What kind of world would my child be inheriting? Would they hate me for bringing them into, as our reading this morning suggested, a world that was dying? Both my spouse and I had several conversations about this truly difficult reality. Was it fair for us to bring someone into a world that was going to be that much harder and scarier for them just because we wanted a child? With global temperatures and fascism on the rise, would they even have a chance to live a full life? Even now, asking those questions aloud, I still wonder. And I suppose that's the inevitability of parenthood. But in the end, amidst those fears and uncertainties, we knew there was space for hope. Because we believed, and still do, that just because the hardships are inevitable, that doesn't mean the healing and beauty is impossible. That because we know what kind of world we are building our family within, we can surround Noor with the values, the experiences, and communities that nurture their creativity, their resilience, their compassion, their commitment to the world that they decide is possible. Witnessing youth and young adults leading the way with movements like the March for Our Lives, the Sunrise Movement, the Black Youth Project 100, the Palestinian Youth Movement, and countless more, reminded us that if the ones inheriting the world are still fighting to change it, we have no excuse to give it up. That Noor would be inheriting not simply a dying world, but an evolving one, shaped by the imaginations and wisdom of the communities committed to the values of collective care and interdependent survival. Now, it has been said in many different ways that this moment in history is a pivotal one, that what happens in the next few months could drastically change the course of not just this country, but the world. And while that's both daunting and true, I find comfort in one critically important reality. This is not the first pivotal moment, not even in some of our lifetimes. As Kelly Hayes and Miriam Kaba continue in the chapter that our reading is from, many of our ancestors experienced the ends of the worlds they had known. During times of siege and enslavement, amid open warfare and famine, behind bars, and while living as fugitives, and with the threat of nuclear annihilation looming overhead, previous generations have found ways to organize for change and for collective survival. Like those who have come before us, we have not just the ability, but the responsibility to be tenaciously honest about the world as it is, truly as it is. That means facing those truths that make us deeply uncomfortable and aware of ways that we have been complicit in or causing or even benefiting from harm to another person or community. That means sitting with stories that challenge us to see the very systems we fight to uphold as still deeply flawed to the point of needing something more than just reform. Making the choice to face the world as it is, and then to make the space to hold and process our grief, is essential to sustaining the hope that we need to imagine and create together the world as it could be. Because as Hayes and Kaba remind us, grief, after all, is a manifestation of love. And our capacity to grieve is in some ways proportional to our capacity to care. Our honesty and grief about the world as it is reminds us that we believe, we know in our bodies, in our bones, that another way of being is possible. Allowing our grief and hope to coexist is not just essential work, it is faithful work. And it is faithful work that many others have been doing, as Hayes and Kaba remind us. It is work that the left outs in our world have been doing, have been persevering, have been creating, even amongst systems and structures that were built to exclude them. How are we listening to those left outs? How are we imagining with those left outs? How is our grief and our hope shaped by their stories? Who is teaching us to imagine beyond the end of this world? Who is teaching us to plant seeds amidst the rubble? There's a song from the Black Youth Project 100 that reminds me of what it means to be accountable to those who have built before and those who continue to persevere in these moments. We are the children of the ones who did not die. We are the children of the people who could fly. We are the children of the ones who persevere. We are fearless, we are strong, and we're ready to carry on. In our world, there are so many examples of the ways in which hope and grief can coexist. Who here is familiar with the story of Cop City in Atlanta and the Stop Cop City movement? Somewhat, all right. Well, great. I'm going to give an overview. So in 2021, it was discovered that Cop City, that's formerly known as the Public Safety Training Center, was being set to be constructed on over 80 acres of land in the Weelaunee Forest just outside of the city of Atlanta. Now, this is land that was stolen from the indigenous Muskogee residents in the 1800s and has since been a site of chattel slavery, both as a plantation in the 19th century and then as the Atlanta City Prison Farm in the 20th century, where inmates were forced to do unpaid labor. The folks that learned that this Cop City was being built came together that summer in 2021 to protest and take action. And that group included the Muskogee Creek people who returned to their ancestral lands and called on everyone to defend the land from Cop City. They've continued their action in 2021 and in 2022, building encampments and having protests with environmental activists, with local Atlanta residents, all the way through 2022 until a major raid happened in December of that year. And then in January of 2023, police murdered the environmental activist Tortuguita, shooting them 57 times. And nobody is being held accountable for that. And then in June of 2023, at a meeting of the Atlanta City Council, where over the overwhelming majority of the 14 hours of public comment had people speaking against the use of city funding to build Cop City, the City Council, the listeners, still voted 11-4 to approve an additional $30 million for its construction, in addition to over $30 million that would be going towards the site for many years to come. The amount that the city is leasing the stolen land to, the Atlanta Police Foundation that's building this Cop City, they're leasing it for $10 a year. And yet, this Stop Cop City movement would not stop. They continued to persevere. They tried other avenues of challenging, including a lawsuit by the South River Watershed Alliance that charged that the pollution from the construction was already affecting the water in the area, affecting the air for communities nearby. And then in September of 2023, activists presented the city with over 100,000 signatures of Atlanta residents to support a public vote on Cop City as part of a referendum, a process that the city council initially said it would honor. Yes, amazing. We were going to have a democratic process to decide how we were going to use that land. And then the city decided that it would not verify those 100,000 signatures, that it would rather than use its already voter suppression tactic of exact signature matching, it would actually appeal to the court and say, actually, the referendum process shouldn't be allowed to repeal a city ordinance. People don't have a right to decide what happens in their city. Critics of this decision by the city council rightfully see this as an assault on democracy, potentially setting a dangerous precedent that the public's direct vote can't outweigh the choices of city officials, that the listeners aren't listening anymore to the people who have the right to decide. And so when I mention Stop Cop City, not just as this moment of real grief and perseverance, it's also about democracy. It is about climate. It is about abolition. It is a moment of intersection of all of our issues combined and the opportunity to finally bring people together and make collective choice about how we want to be. And while this campaign has faced challenge after challenge, suppression tactic after suppression tactic, and uncertainty about whether it will achieve its goal to stop Cop City, there have been important wins. Community members have come together and built relationships in ways that didn't exist before this campaign began. They've created power amongst themselves. They've come up with resources and education and opportunities to imagine a world where they could actually all thrive. And not only that, in Atlanta, but all around the country where Stop Cop City efforts have been growing, even here in the Bay-ish area. I say that as somebody in Oakland preaching in Napa. But we have one even in our own backyard. So even in the midst of this particular campaign not winning, it has grown and created something deeply hopeful and profound. And Stop Cop City does teach us something important that we have to wrestle with when it comes to our democratic process. We know that democracy, as we live it in this country, is not truly democracy. That there are left outs. That there are voters not being allowed to have their voices heard, despite trying to go through all of those rules and all of those processes that they are told are the right way to do the work. And we know that our democracy is not a flawed system. It is a system explicitly built to exclude people and to uplift others at their expense. When something is built in such a way that even taking all the correct steps means you are still denied any voice or representation, we have to ask the question if reform is enough. You can't build on top of a rotten foundation. I've lived in an apartment where the moldy walls are painted over. You still breathe in that mold. We have to imagine a different way to be. And that takes grieving, being honest with the way that things are. We as a country have claimed to live in that ideal that Abraham Lincoln once described as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. But as my colleague, Reverend Ashley Haran, reminds us, that's not the highest ideal our faith calls us to. In her own writings on the nature of government as it currently operates, she recalls the origin of Lincoln's famous words, a speech given by the Boston abolitionist, transcendentalist, and Unitarian minister Theodore Parker. Our faith upholds a government of all the people, by all the people, for all the people. We live in a reality that folks who are the most impacted by powers and systems that are extractive and violent, they are being denied access not only to that little bubble on the ballot, but to resources that can help them survive and thrive. We know that as our democracy exists, with disenfranchisement built in from the beginning of this American experiment, from chattel slavery to the erasure of indigenous communities, it can't stay the way that it is. But there's hope in that. Because in that disenfranchisement, there is a truth. Our values have the majority. There's a reason that those values aren't being allowed to vote. Because they have the majority. And democracy isn't just about getting out the vote or what happens on a couple of Tuesdays every year. Like with Stop Cop City, the most important work is what comes after. After the postcards are mailed, which I encourage you to be a part of today after this service, after the phone banks are closed, after the ballots are cast, how are we showing up again and again to ensure that everybody is cared for and represented in our systems? Once we've put those listeners in place, how are we acting together to make sure the left outs are no longer left out? Let's take a microcosm of our own communities and cultures. Here in congregations, we have votes every year, but then we don't stop showing up on Sunday. We don't stop doing the work of reform, of evolving our community, of making decisions, of growing and learning together. We don't stop showing up in the streets. And whether or not we agree with their demands and cause, the students around the country that are seating encampments on these college campuses are also making clear what democracy looks like beyond the ballot box. They're challenging power in ways that require them to listen to constituents, demanding that how our universities do business align with the set of values that they believe is essential to collective liberation. Like Stop Cop City, this student encampment movement may not win their campaigns that they're asking of their universities, but in the process, they're building the relationships. They're developing skills. They're teaching the rest of us about what is happening in the world and challenging us to learn, grow, and imagine a different way together. So in all of this, if there's so much disenfranchisement, if there's so many left outs, if our democratic process isn't quite a democracy, what this election year is our work? Do we even do the get out the vote work? If there's so much of these problems with our system, if it's not actually built to represent, do we put any energy into it? Absolutely. We do that work not just for the people we put in office or the measures that we pass, while those are important. We do it for ourselves, for our relationships, for our communities, to continue to build that power and those connections that are so essential to our Unitarian Universalist faith. As my colleague Noor Rasman, our Side with Love democracy strategist at the UUA, reminds us, this year the stakes are high and the opportunities are great. We are deepening our partnerships and connections to congregations to build a groundswell of virtual and on-the-ground activity. The UU, the vote trainings, the actions and events cultivate and nurture our connections as we press forward in our journey towards a more just society and a strong democracy. This year, a component of our work continues to be how we can support, resource, and platform frontline organizations building power year-round. That work only happens through sustained attention to relationships and shared, meaningful action. So how do we do that? One, go write some postcards today. Other examples of things that are happening around the country are Unitarian Universalists in Florida working on Amendment 4, the Right to Abortion Initiative, on the ballot this fall, where they are building deeper relationships in their organizing so that once that passes, they can then start to assess how do we create real reproductive justice together, knowing that just saying abortion is legal is not enough. Folks in Arizona are doing the same thing, having a weekend of action at the end of this month. And you know what? Speaking of my phone, who's free at 2 p.m. today? Who's free at 2 p.m.? Don't all volunteer at once. But I just happen to have a nice little QR code if you want to pull out your phones at some point. We're doing a Georgia phone bank today at 2 p.m. So go from your postcards to your phone bank, where we're joining with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, a group that we have worked with for years on immigration justice, on mass incarceration justice, as we contact voters in Georgia to get out the vote for their May 21st primary election. So if you are free at 2 p.m., join us for this is the first phone bank of the year we're doing for you the vote. You'll get trained up, you'll have fun, and you'll make an impact, helping to continue to seed those relationships, to grow those relationships. Join with UUs around the country as part of this effort. We're excited to build those commitments and relationships together, knowing that this year is not the only pivotal moment, but is one of many. And then once you show up for your postcards, once you show up for your phone banks, keep showing up. Keep being with the people that are persevering. Keep being with the people that are dreaming, that are imagining, that are creating something together. Keep bringing in the left outs. Keep bringing in more of the deciders. And keep reminding the listeners, they better be listening. May it be so. I invite you to join us in our closing hymn, which is not 1073, but is 1017, Building a New Way.